And over the next 60 minutes, we will thrash out two big questions. One, how hard hit is the real estate sector by a cash crunch? There have been reports of developers having to borrow from the unsecured route at rates as high as 4% per month. That translates to 48% per annum. At a recent CREDAI national meet, developers were up in arms on this issue. How deep is the crisis, or is it overhyped? In the second half of the show, we look at the Chennai property market, residential market. What's driving prices there? The National Housing Bank Residex shows that residential prices in Chennai market have risen over 200% in the last 4 years, the highest amongst top 15 cities of India. So, those are our two big topics today. Let's start with the first one, the cash crunch news, which has been the industry's big talking point. Let me introduce the panel to you. We've got Mr. Subhash Bedi, Managing Director, Red Fort Capital, joining us here in the Delhi studio. Mr. Naveen Raheja, very familiar face for the industry, and of course here on NDTV as well, MD Raheja Developers. From our Mumbai studio, we'll be joined by Ramesh Jogani, Managing Director and CEO of India REIT. T. Chitti Babu, Chairman and CEO of Akshaya Homes, joins us from Chennai. And of course, Sameer D'Souza, my expert co-anchor, always has a differing viewpoint from the industry for the consumer. And he's here with me in the Delhi studio. Gentlemen, thanks very much. I'm going to just read out a small data point to just basically talk about what's happening. Cash crunch in real estate sector. Now, let's look at 2 years ago when RBI cautioned against lending to real estate. Banks since then have been extremely reluctant to lend. There's been a sharp rise over the last 2 years as well in interest rates. We know that 13 to 14 times. Sales and profits of developers have been under pressure. Muted foreign investments, that's a very big reality because none of those foreign funds can see the economic reforms they've been looking for. And PE funding, we don't have any data here to prove, and I'm sure the panel will help us decide whether PE funding is going down or actually increasing for real estate sector. So all in all, the sector's looking at very expensive borrowing. Hear out Pradeep Chaudhary, Chairman of State Bank of India, on why he sounded a note of caution when he spoke about lending to real estate sector.
No, not particularly, because our exposure is very less, 3 to 4%, and most of it is secured by the rent receivables of the tenants there. We have been pretty, I would say, cautious in lending to the real estate sector. But real estate is an interest-sensitive sector, so your concerns are quite valid that when the interest rates are high, real estate sector would be at risk.
Okay, Mr. Raheja, first of all, from the developer's point of view, what's going on? Is it true? Front page story that developers have to borrow at 4%, otherwise they just don't have the money to finish projects. How widespread is it? I'm sure not all developers are going through it.
Not all developers. There are many developers who have their own self-generation of funds through sales, and they are executing their projects on time, but there are some who during recession time could not cope up with it. They had to extensively borrow, and that borrowing led to a vicious cycle, and now to cover up that vicious cycle, because after all you have to deliver the projects. So there are very selective few developers who are resorting to that kind of funding from private sources, from I know even directly or indirectly, whether it is PE funds or whatever. They also have a hidden structure which is actually it is a debt funding only in a form of PE. Right. So these things are there. They structure debt. They are expensive debts, but they have no other option, and so you have to fall to the even vulture funds also.
So, all right, Subhash, so I have to come to you, because when we talk about PE funding for real estate, now my question is that is it really just the developers who probably went through a wretched time during the subprime crisis, who haven't been able to get out of it? I don't think it's that limited. I think it's much more widespread.
Well, besides, I mean, because there's two aspects of it. One is developers needing money to finish projects. The second is developers needing money for growth, right? Now, developers needing money for projects, odds are, it's very far and few between people borrowing money at 4%. That translates almost 50% cost of capital, a developer is more likely to discount his product, sell it in the market to his customer base, and get the goodwill from his customer base. So as far as actual people borrowing from the market at, let's say, a 50% aggregate cost of capital per year, that is far and few between.
Okay.
Now, then it comes down to capital for growth. Now, for growth, you need to buy land. Most developers are not sitting on land banks today that they can monetize in the next 12 to 18 months.
They're not.
I mean, in the sense of the majority of their stock is probably land that it'll take maybe a year, 2 or 3 years for the city growth to catch up with that land bank, and then they can launch those projects. So as far as buying projects and launching projects in the next 18 months, they need to buy land. The capital sources for buying land in today's environment are very restricted because the Indian banks do not lend for land. And so then it really boils down to what are your sources of equity. So either there's the public markets, and for the most part, public market investors have not seen the returns from buying publicly listed companies,
and
whether in an IPO.
Real estate companies.
Specifically real estate, or that it becomes down to private equity. On the private equity side, the capital is very, very scarce. Okay, most of there's very little money out there, and so from a private equity fund's perspective, competing for that fund's money, obviously in a capitalistic world, those funds go to where the risk return is the greatest.
All right, so you're saying that it's tougher for you to borrow as well to further lend to real estate sector in this country? Is the pool there getting smaller and tighter? Is it India specific?
To a large extent, yes. The regulator has, in our humble opinion, done a terrible job of inviting capital in the real estate sector, both for domestic funds as well as international funds. On the domestic fund side, even as recently as in the last 7 days, more restrictions have come on the ability of fund managers to raise capital in the domestic markets. Okay. On the international markets, the fluctuation of the rupee, most recently the latest budget and its announcement of various tax provisions for international funds via routes like Mauritius, all of that makes raising capital for Indian real estate much more difficult.
All right, so we can already see even more troubled times ahead. Mr. Chittibabu, what's your viewpoint, sir? Subhash here says that, and Mr. Raheja says that yes, there is a cash crunch, but if you're talking about 50% and so interest rates, it's only limited to developers, very small size of the universe. How big do you think is the problem, the fact that the industry is staring at drying up sources of funds?
See, the fact is, yes, real estate industry, which is contributing 5% GDP growth in the last previous year, that is about 10-11, it definitely requires support and requires the money inflow by various manners to reach our targets. If this industry is growing at a percentage of 20 in year on year, it definitely requires a large volume of funds which need to be supported either by PE or by FDI. But if you are talking about short term of 4% and 5%, which is a small volume of developers, probably one particular segment has expanded beyond their capacity, who can't be able to deliver the products on time, necessarily need to go to that kind of a funding methodology. Otherwise, the fund is definitely available at a lesser price, and if the projects are able to give that kind of returns, if PEs and FDIs are willing to come. But what kind of a guarantee this government is supporting in terms of reforms? If most of the tax collections are going to happen in a retrospective manner, funds will not come to this particular sector, and it is not a recognized sector till today. Even though this is contributing, the third sector as out of the 14 major sectors which is contributing to the GDP growth, this is still today it is not recognized as a industry which we can able to bring growth to the economy. In that particular scenario, if the fund is available in a much lower and cheaper price, the development can happen in the larger scale, and the infrastructure development also can happen in a multi-folder, which will definitely help this country to grow. in real estate
Right.
sector.
Mr. Titibabu, tell me, are you getting loans from banks? Is that happening at all? Subhash said it's not happening for land acquisitions, which is growth. That's where the growth will come from. How tough has it become for any real estate company to borrow from banks?
See, bank funding is not at all available for land procurement. When the bank funding is available only for project funding, for construction funding, which is available in a debt form or the other form. But today, the financial institutions are not open to fund any land procurement other than if you go for a PE fund or FDI.
Ramesh, what's your take on this matter? How hard up is the real estate industry when it comes to cash?
Cash has become very, very dear, but we've just passed 31st March and I've not heard of any NPAs. So there has been some rollover, there has been some payments made by developers. So bank funding now has been substituted by NBFC and your private equity funding. So there is definitely a cause of alarm, but not really visible as of now.
So Ramesh, it's not as bad as what it was after the subprime crisis. There's no danger, grave danger like that, because I remember at that point of time the sector had become very cash strapped. You're saying that yes, rollovers are happening. We do know the figure that there's 2 lakh crore outstanding loan by the real estate sector to the Indian banks, and that's perhaps why they're reluctant to lend more. But you're saying that PE funding and NBFC funding is available.
No, I'm not saying it's available. What I'm saying is there is no NPAs announced as of date. So obviously there has been some rollover, there has been some prior funding being substituted by NBFC and private equity. So there is a crisis, but it's yet not come to the fore. So we'll have to wait and watch how it spans out. So as of now, I've been in touch with quite many developers with debt, but I know of one developer for sure who managed to get funding from a nationalized bank before 31st March. So I think while the noise is that banks are not lending, but banks are lending, because it would mean a very critical situation for the full system. So it's not that banks are not lending; they are lending, but it's in a very slow motion as of now.
Okay, banks are lending. This is, and that's what you told me, Mr. Raheja, off the record. You said banks are lending. In this case, what Ramesh is pointing out, banks are lending because they're forced to. They have to roll over, right? So they probably have to do a bridge. Otherwise, even the interest payments would become tougher.
No, I don't agree. Banks are lending to good real estate companies, even for no rollover, for nothing, just for, even for growth they are lending, let me tell you that. We are one of them, we have got money.
Okay.
And we are one of them who are getting offers almost every week from one bank or the other to take money.
All right. So,
at a much cheaper rate of interest.
So okay. Samir, what's your point of view? Cash crunch, yes. One clamor that the sector has is that give us industry status, and that pretty much seems to come up in every discussion and every debate that we have, whether we have a land acquisition debate, whether we have bringing costs down, whether we talk about making execution delays. It's industry status. How does that solve the problem that banks are not lending enough, even if they are?
First of all, just to add to what everybody said, this 4% number that's really coming up is majorly coming from Mumbai, because a lot of projects were not approved and developers could not go out and sell. So there was a lot of trouble that Mumbai developers have had. It's not true with respect to the entire country. The interest borrowing is there, but it's at a lower rate. Secondly, if the industry status is actually granted and banks get down to lending a bit more or much more, or restructuring a large amount of this debt, I think developers will be in a far more better position to complete the projects at least, and then be able to roll over the cash flows that they get from the customers for completing other land banks that they've acquired.
What do you think is really the actual cost of borrowing for the real estate sector here? So there's one extreme of 4%, which he says is specific to Mumbai. How would you structure the debt? At what cost? 16 to 21% as the figures have been reading from sources, or it could be much higher?
I'll give you a non-answer.
It depends on demand and supply. And here it seems that everybody's being politically very correct.
Look, it depends on the risks that you're taking. Okay, so what Naveenji said is 100% correct, that banks are lending money. We have projects and development partners that are given significant amounts of capital from the banks. Typically, those are for projects where you don't need the money, though. Okay?
Right. Always. Banks always chase you when you don't need the money.
Because the risk is so low in those. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so the question then becomes that the developers need money where the banks aren't lending. Okay, and so obviously there'll be a premium associated with, you know, the rate at which the banks are lending. And so if the banks continue to lend at these higher rates every single quarter, then obviously the premium for equity goes higher. One other thing I would comment on, as far as you asked earlier, the difference between 2008, the subprime crisis, and today. In 2008, the NBFCs were able to come to the rescue of the industry overall.
Yes.
Today, what's different is the RBI's put the clamps on NBFCs as well.
Absolutely.
And they basically said this is systemic threats to the Indian banking sector. And so this time around, the NBFCs aren't able to, I would say, rescue is a wrong word, but put out as much capital to aid the industry as they did in 2008 and 2009.
Also, to add to that, PE funds used to have a lot of put options. Now, RBI has clamped down very heavily upon that as well. So now, private equity funds also can't come to the rescue, because earlier they were structuring their deals in form of lending, as Mr. Raheja said, but now RBI says clearly that they have to be in form of clear equity.
Is that true? I do know a lot of structured debt is happening.
Let's put it this way. The Indian government's made conflicting statements about 3 times in the last 6 months.
Absolutely. And even that retrograde news that you could have foreign investments routed through Mauritius being taxed. You know, when real estate companies don't have money, what really happens? It affects us. It affects you and me, because construction stops, projects lie incomplete, and the biggest loser in this losing game is the distressed home buyer. It's as simple as that. When we come back, what's the way out of this mess? Agreed, it's not as big as what we've been reading. It's not 4% or 48, 50% borrowing for the real estate sector across the country. It's in just some pockets. But yes, cash is drying up. You're watching the Big Realty Debate here on NDTV Profit, and we're looking at real estate sector. Is it hard hit by a cash crunch? We just discussed why and how much, but what happens when there is a cash crunch? Execution delays at an all-time high. We have showed you that data earlier on the property show. Numbers of completed projects keep dropping. Structured debt from PE firms come at rates of 16 to 21%, and sometimes even higher. Nobody's willing to say how much. Unsecured loans from the market come at 48%. We've established that yes, foreign money is coming less, becoming more and more difficult with the topsy-turvy policies of the government. You also have NBFC money coming down for the real estate sector, and we all know what's happening to the banking sector. They've been told by the RBI that be very careful when it comes to lending to real estate sector. Okay, Ramesh, I'm going to come to you. RBI's warning on real estate sector lending was not without a reason. They found huge number of discrepancies in the accounting systems and found the risk too high.
As long as the developer is paying back his debt, I don't see any reason why there should be alarm. And like I said earlier, there's no real NPA in the system. There is a cash crunch, and it's not only with real estate, it's with infrastructure, it's with any other segment, because of the interest rates really going high. And so even the real estate is facing similar issues. Now, accounting system is more for the investors, but I don't know how do you relate accounting to payment of debt. If payments are being made, and how does that got? So I really do not understand the correlationship between accounting and payment of debt.
All right, so you're saying maybe the caution from RBI and even other banks getting very, very restrictive and conservative is not justified. Chitty Babu, what's your viewpoint here? Mr. Raheja said that granting an industry status, actually you mentioned that point, granting an industry status to the sector will be a big relief when it comes to borrowing from the banks. There's also allowing external commercial borrowings and relaxing norms for repatriation of FDI in real estate. What other steps would you like to ensure that the sector gets the money that it needs for the growth that you pointed out at the beginning of the show, sir?
See, when RBI comes very heavily on real estate funding, we definitely need to look at this industry which is struggling for quite a long, which is contributing to the GDP growth, definitely require infrastructure status. With the infrastructure status, definitely this industry can grow and contribute more to the economical growth of this country. And we can restructure your repayments and funding is definitely in your better status, and banks will definitely come forward to fund the industry when it comes with the status of the infrastructure and the status. Definitely it will happen.
Okay, industry status, will it solve all the problems, Mr. Raheja, or do you think, Subhash just mentioned this point with all without going into the specifics, if that ruling really comes in retrospective tax on all the investments which have been routed through Mauritius, it's a big setback for FDI in general and FII investments in India. It's nothing to do with this sector anyhow.
Correct. First question, infrastructure status. Yes, it is going to help. Number one, the access to money will be on cheaper terms because basic rate, interest rate, and then from bank to bank you have to pay over and above that, and from party to party also credibility you have to pay over and above that. But it really, at least it helps. It allows the banks to make lending,
I know, but it's not going to come. It's not going to come. That's the thing, Mr. Raheja.
Look, it's one thing to say, blanket industry status, but what is it that people are really after? It's cheaper sources of capital.
Yes.
Now, what will do that is, and what's lacking in the environment today, is for banks to be able to have qualitative kind of differentiation between asset-backed lending versus cash flow-backed lending. And right now, they try to paint everything as the same. Okay, where people got into trouble, both the banks and developers, from as early as 3 years ago, was on land banks that there'll be no cash flows for the next 3 years. You borrow short-term loans. Obviously, that creates a payment problem both for the bank and the developer. On the other hand, there's projects that are liquid. Cash flows are coming, either it's a commercial project and there's rentals, or the developer knows he'll be able to launch this project in a year, by which he'll be able to pay the banks back. That's cash flow based lending. Right. And the problem is the RBI tries to paint one brush across the entire sector as opposed to kind of differentiating between the two, and only by peeling that onion and doing work, okay, will actually cheaper lending happen to the sector.
So what is your assessment about the, do you think the risks of providing equity to real estate sector in the country has gone up? Forget about what you can borrow from outside and raise funds. What's your own assessment of this? Well,
obviously this is my business and I don't think the risk is up. I actually think we have been taking a long-term view on the Indian real estate market for the last 7 years. And
you think there's money to be made?
We think the fundamentals,
reasonably safe money to be made.
We think the fundamentals in the Indian real estate market are absolutely intact as far as long-term job growth, income growth in the market, and at the end of the day, these people need to buy houses. If you take a look at the for all the battering, okay, and all the negativity we just heard over the last 20 minutes, the affordability index, which means the ratio of people's household income to price of the house, is actually at a 10-year low.
You're serious about that?
Well, think about how much salaries have gone up.
Houses have become extremely expensive.
Think about how much salaries have gone up, okay? And think about the cost of steel, cement, labor, okay, in terms of the input cost for the developer. So while everybody likes to cast a negative brush on real estate, affordability is at a 10-year high.
Salaries actually have gone up 10 times over the last 10 years, whereas real estate rates have gone up only 5 times. So actually affordability has increased.
That's why the developers are working on lower margins.
Okay.
And coming back to that, banks actually, till now, when there is no status of infrastructure or industry given to real estate sector, banks are lending only by way of term loan. And then door to door in those term loans is either 3 years, maximum 4 years.
Right.
Now the banks are not able to understand that a real estate project takes a much longer time. So why this NPAs and that all cash crunches are happening? Because banks start demanding money back after 1 year. Now that is the peak time to invest in construction, and at that stage bank is telling you to repay them.
loan in.
All right, so,
that is the
I
problem.
think the general consensus arrived at in this debate is that it's not crazy. Cash crunch is not that severe when it comes to real estate sector. In fact, I'm just going to end with this very interesting data here, and this is some of the top 3 companies. Actually, we've got DLF, Unitech, HTIL, and I'm going to read out these graphics in terms of the debt that they had on their books. If you look at FY10 to FY12, DLF has been able to reduce its debt, Unitech has been able to reduce its debt, and HTIL debt is almost stagnant. So deleveraging is happening. There's no reason to panic. So next time when you read a big story which says real estate sector is borrowing at 4% or almost 50% per annum, take it by, just take it with a bag full of salt, if not a pinch of salt. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Chiri Babu, Ramesh, pleasure to have you on this debate. And Subhash, very interesting viewpoints. Mr. Raheja always speaks freely, openly and fiercely. Sameer D'Souza, interesting viewpoints. We will continue. What's driving the prices of homes in Chennai? It's been the best performing market over the last 4 years amongst India's top 15 cities, with average home prices rising by over 200%. There's a lot beneath what's obvious. That's coming up next.
What is unique about Chennai, and more so in
Welcome back to the Realty Debate. Every week we look at an industry-specific issue and also delve deep into a consumer market to ensure you get to the bottom of any issue or a market. Today, what's driving Chennai home prices? That's the big debate. Suresh Reddy, founder and director of Hanu Reddy Realty India Private, joins us, and we also have with us Ganesh Vasudevan, business head India Property. And here with me in the Delhi studio, I have with me Subhash Bedi, Managing Director of Red Fort Capital, and Sameer D'Souza, CEO and founder of Prop Equity, a very familiar face. Okay, I'm going to just lay out some graphics or data points for you to understand why we are even discussing the Chennai market. Realty prices have risen 196% since 2007. Actually, they blipped only in 2008. That's the subprime crisis. Otherwise, they've only been on a steady rise. This is the highest growth amongst top 15 cities of India. It's been the most stable residential market. Prices rose by 48% in 2009, 49% in 2010, and 38% in 2011. This is the National Housing Bank Residex data. Okay, so the first question which comes, and I'm going to pose this to Ganesh. Ganesh, why do you think Chennai is so hot?
what is unique about Chennai, and more so when compared to markets inside Mumbai or Delhi, is that nearly 80-85% of sales are towards own end use. In the sense, the speculative element in terms of purchasing is almost absent. That's a big contributor to relative non-volatility in terms of prices. So there is we are not seeing huge swings or huge crashes either ways in terms of increase or drops in prices of apartments. But having said that, over the last 2 years, what is primarily, so this, as you rightly said, net of the 2008 drop, which has been a steady but regular and continuous growth over the last 2 years. This has been primarily driven by a strong growth in demand for residential housing in Chennai, which has a strong correlation to the growth that the IT sector has seen, the re-emergence of the BPO industry in Chennai particularly, the strong growth in the automobile and the manufacturing sectors. There are two clear corridors that have emerged in terms of the IT corridor and the manufacturing corridor, and areas in between these two have emerged as hot favorites as far as residential housing projects are concerned, and demand here too is increasing. The second is a large influx of trained workforce which is coming into Chennai from various parts of the country, and they require either temporary or permanent accommodation. Temporary in the sense for the 1 to 3 years that they plan to work in the city, or permanent from a pure long-term perspective. They choose to make Chennai as a city of residence. So all these are contributed to the robust demand for housing in Chennai, which has resulted in a relatively insulated market as far as price fluctuations go.
Mr. Reddy, Ganesh says that it's an end-use market and not an investor market. There are 85% end users who are buying it. That's the reason why the market's been so stable. And it's IT, SEZ, which is actually industry, which is flipping the growth in Chennai.
Yes.
Mr. Reddy sir,
I totally
what do you
agree
think?
with him.
Why are Chennai prices moving up so much?
Chennai is end users market, and if you take 2007, there was no, there were not many investors in the Chennai market for a big correction. So since it was only an end users market, the rise in property price has been very gradual from 2007 till now 2012.
All right, end-use market, that's what I'm hearing, 85% end-use market, that's the reason why this market has done so fantastically well. Yes, I understand. I mean, it's become the automobile capital of the country. There's a lot of BPO, IT sector, which is filliping industry growth in Chennai. But is that all? It's the top performing city amongst India's top 15 cities.
I don't necessarily agree with that, first of all. I'd like to make some very important points here. One is that the base of Chennai was very low. So if the base of a city is so low, and if it appreciates by 100% or 200%, you know, the prices have really not gone that high.
It definitely looks better than Mumbai.
It looks better than Mumbai. So base was 2,000 rupees a square feet. It's now at 3,500, 4,000 rupees a square feet. Secondly, it is an end-use market for sure. There is not too much investor demand over there, but the prices haven't gone up that much. I think there are many other cities in the top 15 cities where prices are appreciated much more. And even if you look at what's going to be happening in the near future, 42,000 units are coming up that are going to be ready in 2012 compared to only 12,000 units that got ready in 2011. So the market was doing well. A lot of project launches happened, but in the near future we don't know what's going to really happen with respect to prices with so much supply getting ready. And project launches have also reduced substantially. In the first 6 months in 2011, there were about 225 projects launched, 21,000 odd units launched, a weighted average price 4,000 rupees a square feet. And in the last 6 months of 2011, projects came down to 113, total units to about 9,900, and the pricing has come down to about 3,500 rupees a square feet.
For new project launches. That's very interesting.
What is doing well, lastly, is basically projects that have got 30-40% completed, and approvals are not coming through that quickly, and that's why the launches have reduced substantially as well. That's why the projects that are completed by 30-40%, those are the ones that are appreciating or are defensive. New launches are happening at lower rates.
It can't be about the entire market that new launches are happening at lower rate. You funded 3 projects in that market in Chennai. What's your take, Subhash? There is a story, there is a growth story, definitely IT, BPO, auto, 3 large industries that you see.
Yeah, first of all, I agree with my colleague that compared to other markets in India, Chennai is a lot more end-user driven compared to some of those cities. I do think that when we try to look at Chennai as a macro market, it loses some of the granularity. If you exclude OMR Road, which is the IT corridor of Chennai, which is technically not in Chennai, because that has yet to establish all the social amenities like hospitals, schools, and everything else for people to move there. If you actually exclude that market, then the price appreciation is a lot higher than the 3,000 rupees that you're talking about. Fundamentally, what that's driven by is, compared to most other large markets in India, the approval process in Chennai is a lot longer. It's more than double. And so as a result,
how long does it take to, because the number of projects being launched, he's saying, have fallen.
And it's because of that time horizon. It can take, it wouldn't be uncommon for a project to take 18 to 24 months for approvals. As a result, your inherent supply that's available for either an end user or investor in the limits of Chennai, not necessarily OMR Road, is a lot less. And hence, that a project with approvals, not necessarily even 30 to 40% completed, can command a huge premium in the market.
All right, so here's the differentiation which we've just arrived at, that new projects are not the ones which are getting launched very expensive. It's essentially the constructed projects, or 40 to 50% constructed projects which are doing extremely well. Let's bring up some of the top 5 emerging Hotspots in Chennai property market. What are these? We talked about Old Mahabalipuram Road. Of course, that's one. But if you look at some of the other areas which are doing extremely well, Tambaram East is one. GST Road is the other one. Porur and Poonamali, that's the third one that we have on the list. There's Tambaram, that's not Tambaram East, but the other side of Tambaram, which is also doing very well. Olmar is actually a nomenclature which has become nationally famous now. And then there is Ambattur. When we come back, we're going to look at, are these the top 5 markets to look at if you're going to be investing anywhere in Chennai? What are the price trends likely to be in residential property going ahead? 2-bedroom apartments are the highest apartments being sold, but if you look at quarter-on-quarter trend, they have been in demand a little less.
We've had to course correct our other projects as well, where we had more 2 bedrooms than 3 bedrooms, and we had to switch.
You had to switch to 3 bedrooms.
We had to make it more 3 bedrooms and less 2 bedrooms.
Looking at the Chennai market, what's driving residential prices in Chennai? It's been one of the top performing cities according to the National Housing Bank Residex figures over the last 4 years in terms of price appreciation. Mr. Reddy is with us in the Chennai studio. Mr. Reddy, so the panel here believes that the reason why Chennai residential prices are going up is because approvals are not coming, so there is not that much supply as demand. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The number of projects approved is very less, and the demand is very high because of the booming automobile sector, the ITES sector, and the education and the healthcare sector are booming in Chennai. We need more projects to come up and mass projects to come up.
What, according to you, are the top 5 or 6 locations or localities in Chennai or outside of Chennai? We named a few. We talked about Tambaram, we talked about GST Road, and as we speak, of course, the price appreciations of all these data provided by Prop Equity will come up. Porur, Poonamali, Omar and Ambattur. What, according to you, Mr. Reddy, are some of the hot markets?
The ECR Road is also emerging for the high net worth individuals. There are a lot of villas are coming along the beach, and now approvals are also coming for high-rise beyond Muttukadu. Vandalur Kerambakam is another road which is developing very well, and of course the stretch from Madurai to Sriperumbudur is also booming.
Alright, so these are some of the other localities. Where are your projects based?
Well, I don't want to be biased and say where my projects are. Those are the best places to invest.
So what point of view? I know it's an end user market, but it always, even end users want to know how much will my property appreciate.
Well, Peru is one market which has been one of my favorites. How much will the market really appreciate in Chennai? I would give it an inflationary-led kind of an appreciation from here onwards. I won't expect Chennai to do more than 10 to 15% on a year-on-year basis.
Okay, so that he's coming straight to an outlook, but let me get Ganesh in here. Ganesh, India Property knows the market in and out. I mean, that's your home city, and you've been studying Chennai for a really long time. We'll bring out some of the other interesting consumer trends that India Property has noticed in the Chennai market. But in terms of the emerging localities, which all our viewers want to know, what are those according to you?
Chennai's market, if you see, typically development has lagged infrastructure growth. Infrastructure growth has in fact followed housing development in most locations, including OMR. Now OMR has now emerged. What started as a trend, say a couple of years back, is now actually peaking out in terms of prices here because the infrastructure is fairly in place now. So drawing a similar parallel, areas that are now looking to be hot are areas where the new greenfield airport project that has been announced, and the area behind the current airport. So the parts of GST, parts of Porur, Tambaram East, are all emerging as very hot locations now. In fact, over the last 3 months, there have been a slew of launches. Nearly a dozen projects have been launched in these areas in Chennai, and most of these are slated for delivery stroke closure by 2014-2015, and that will kind of culminate and coincide with the completion of the metro connectivity too. So with the metro increasing the connectivity to the airport, the time to travel from the CBD to the airport and beyond is reduced to less than 30 minutes, which makes the areas beyond airport, particularly on the GST and the Porur side, very accessible. So these are hot emerging areas that I think would be favorites in the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay, very interesting data also here from India Properties, and let me just take you through some of that in terms of the emerging preferences of the Chennai property market. And this is India Property data. It talks about how essentially you've got budget preferences of buyers having gone up by about 10%, that's it, 10%, but average square feet preferences actually have seen a 12% drop. So what's happening is that people are preferring smaller apartments with higher amenities. Also, there is a very clear, distinct preference of slightly smaller apartments, but they have to be 3 BHK. I think, there is this trend that within the same area, square feet area, you have at least 3 bedrooms instead of 2 bedrooms. Ganesh, explain these trends to us. It's smaller area, but 3 bedrooms. So what are people paying for? Because they are willing to pay 10% more.
If you really look at it, hypothetically speaking, a consumer in Chennai is likely to settle for a 3 BHK 1000 square feet flat as compared to a 2 BHK even 1200 square feet flat, if both are available at the same price, which clearly points out a preference in terms of shift towards a 3 BHK room, 3 BHK house, even though the family sizes haven't really grown much, which is indicative of the large urbanization that is happening in Chennai. Clearly double income families, and therefore the need for privacy for children, a separate recreational area is all coming out strong. The overall demand for 3 BHK flats is very high in Chennai. So that makes these properties far more marketable from a resale perspective to later. So from an investment option, the 3 BHK has emerged as a much stronger alternative for a consumer as compared to 2 BHK flat.
Subhash, any interesting consumer trends you see, because you say that it's an end-use market?
It's interesting because I'm not sure if that data that you're referring to is what people claim that they want or what they are actually buying, because those are two very different things. A lot of times when we do planning for projects, we assume people want smaller sizes, and hence more bedrooms in a smaller amount of space, and we design towers such.
So they have data actually which shows that yes, 2-bedroom apartments are the highest apartments being sold, but if you look at quarter-on-quarter trend, they have been in demand a little less. This is 2011 trends, but if you look at the 3-bedroom apartments, the base is smaller than the 2-bedroom apartments demand, but it's been increasing slightly.
Oh, that's absolutely correct. We've had to course correct our other projects as well, where we had more 2 bedrooms than 3 bedrooms, and we had to switch.
You had to switch to 3 bedrooms.
We had to make it more 3 bedrooms and less 2 bedrooms.
Also, would you corroborate India Property data where it says that people are willing to pay more for amenities and branded names in Chennai market? Because that's a market which generally you think that South is a little more less flashy, so probably they don't need the big swimming pools. They would be far more value conscious, but the data seems to indicate a little otherwise.
But it also points to, the other part of the data demographically is the average home buyer age has gone down significantly as well. So now the average home buyer, let's say they're in their low 30s, they're aspiring, they want those kind of amenities for their children, whether they're empty nesters today and they will have children in the future, or they have young kids today. They see the value in having a playground downstairs where their young kids can play, or the clubhouse and things like that. So absolutely, people see value in living in a gated community and having those amenities.
And Samir, last word in from you. You're saying that the prices are not going to appreciate as well as they have been appreciating in the last 4 years.
Main reason for that is a lot of supply getting ready. 42,000 next year, this year and the next year 25,000.
Less new launches, explain this. Lesser new launches, more regulatory delays, but more projects getting launched. 2011, according to you, was probably the worst.
I'm saying more projects getting completed from the past.
Completed from the past.
Not more projects getting launched right now.
All right, so projects getting launched are going down, but in 2012, 13 and 14, you will see a huge amount of supply.
Yeah, but not in the main city. Like Subhash rightly pointed out, this is mainly OMR, mainly outskirts of the city. There is hardly any supply coming in the city. And when we talk about primary markets and we talk about bigger cities, we talk about suburbs and all those areas appreciating 10, 20 to 30%. Since there's a complete demand-supply mismatch in the top tier 1 cities, those appreciation trends are completely different. Whether you look at a Mumbai, New Delhi, or for that matter, Calcutta.
Mr. Reddy, would you agree with that? That maybe the next 3-4 years, we may not see the kind of heady residential property prices rise that we've seen in the past?
See, the property is a long-term investment, and a person should buy a property for a 10-year period. It is not a short-term investment. And what I have studied for properties over the last 30 years is there is a 4 times rise in flats for every 10 years. So there will be, as the supply comes in, and there will be a certain tapering off. But if you take a 10-year period, you can see you can expect flat to appreciate 4 times.
All right. The conclusion is that you will get to see a steady rise in the Chennai residential market because industry is going there. There are upcoming localities which are hot and emerging destinations which are doing well. There are PE funds which are invested in the Chennai market. There could be some excess supply or reasonably good supply in the next 3 years. So maybe the price appreciation that you've seen in the last 4 years may not continue. You could see a little more tapered investment outlook when it comes to Chennai residential market. Mr. Suresh Reddy, thanks very much, sir, for joining us here on this discussion on Chennai residential market. Ganesh Vasudevan, business head, India Property, thanks for joining us. Subhash, pleasure that you could stay back to discuss Chennai market, and your insights are always the ones that our viewers are looking at. That's it from me. I'll see you again same time tomorrow, and we'll be back to taking all your questions and answers on the show as we do on a regular property show.